Good evening. Tonight we're going to be in Genesis chapter, we'll start in 32, kind of the last half of 32. We're right at the point of Jacob traveling south, returning home from his time in Padan Aram with his father-in-law Laban, where he went up there for 20 years. During that 20 years, he worked 14 of them for his wives, and then 6 years he worked for his flocks, and he became relatively wealthy and is now traveling south. And the problem that Jacob is facing is that behind him he has sorry, I was going to put my phone in my back pocket. I usually put it down, but it was closed. All right, so behind him he's got problems. He wasn't getting along with Laban. Laban changed his wages, and so he's leaving Laban on bad terms. In front of him, he's got problems. He spurned his brother Esau 20 years ago. He never made it right. So now he's traveling back. Esau has had time to expand his house and his power and those sorts of things. So here he is traveling back. I want to just note something here. On his way back, in chapter 32, and this is one of the, I just went right over this verse last week, but it just stood out to me this week. In chapter 32, verse 1, it says, "Now as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him." I just think this is interesting. It doesn't say what happened. It doesn't say what kind of communication they had, anything like that. All it says is this happened on the way. So God told him to leave. He leaves. Laban catches up to him. He makes peace with Laban. So at least he gets that squared away. He has a understanding with Laban. They set up a little rock and poured some oil on it or whatever they did. They had a meal. They left in peace. And if Jacob will not pass that rock with hostility towards Laban, and Laban won't pass that rock with hostility towards Jacob. So they have peace, and Jacob moves on. The angel of the Lord's met him. It's just kind of an interesting little thing that you see in this. So, but you also get an indication that God is with him. You know, there's another one of these little verses in Joshua. I think it's beginning of Joshua chapter 6 or the end of Joshua chapter 5. Joshua is getting ready to go and attack Jericho, and in the evening there's a man standing out somewhere, and Joshua says, "Are you for us or against us?" And he says, "I'm for the Lord." And who are you? "I'm the captain of the Lord's hosts." And that's basically all you get. and it's just kind of an interesting thing, and I might make a connection to Jesus with that, where you're kind of seeing Jesus appear to Joshua in the Old Testament, because when Jesus is going to the cross, what's he say? "Don't you know that I have command of the Lord's angels?" So maybe you see a glimpse of Jesus there. I don't know that this is the case. It's just interesting. It's just one of those little tidbits in the Bible that's put in there. It's put in there for a reason, but I don't quite understand the reason. But what you can get from it is God is with Jacob. He is going with him forward. So as Jacob goes forward, he's got to go face the harm he's done, the guilt he has. And you know he has guilt because he's afraid to go meet Esau. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, you just generally, if you're just measuring things, talking to people or whatever, you don't hide things that you feel that you're proud of. Right? I mean, it's just one of those things. If you did it and you don't want, if you're trying to like redirect the conversation or, steer people off of that point, you don't do that with things you're proud of, generally speaking. Mike?
I think it's interesting. To me, he acknowledges the fact that Esau's got a reason to be angry with him.
Yeah.
I mean, now granted, there may be other issues that Esau has, but still, Esau has good reason to be angry with Jacob. And he kind of acknowledges that with his attitude, and he never really says it. Well, I guess he does when he actually meets him, he does say it. But
yeah, he's afraid. Jacob's really afraid, and Esau is probably rightly angry with him, although murder probably isn't the right avenue for it. But that was the situation he left, and it's only had time to be neglected. So here Jacob is. He's kind of, he sends his family across the river. He's cleared his path. Let me just take a look here. Yeah, in verse 7, 32, verse 7, it says, "Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided his people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and 2 camels into 2 companies. For he said, if Esau comes to one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape." So he knows what Esau, he knows that he wronged Esau. And maybe all these years living under Laban and being wronged by Laban, it's really had a chance to set with him the wrong that he did. Even if he didn't fully understand it when he was a young man, now as an older man, he really does understand what's going on here. So Jacob lets his family cross the river. He stays on the other side. He's alone. Verse 24, "Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh, so that the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled him. Then he said, 'Let me go, for dawn is breaking.' But he said, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' So he said to him, 'What is your name?' And he said, 'Jacob.' He said, 'Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with man and have prevailed.' Then Jacob asked him and said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he said, 'Why is it that you ask my name?' And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, 'I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved.' Now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed over Penuel, and he was limping on his thigh. Therefore to this day the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh in the sinew of his hip." So here you see Jacob, kind of a turning point in his life. It says he met a man. It's interesting. It doesn't give, this is interesting to me in that it tells you the story and leaves so much out, so much description, that I want to know, why did he wrestle with this man? To me, that's a why. Like, if you meet somebody, why did he end up wrestling with him? And then at some point while he's wrestling with him, why is he wrestling with him, telling him to give him a blessing? So here's something interesting about this. This is just kind of Hebrew words, but you'll see up here the top one. This is the Hebrew, English letters, but Hebrew sound. You can kind of see similarities. Is Jacob, so that's Jacob's name. They were at the river Jabbok, which is Yabak. So you see the similarity there. And then they wrestled, which is Yabek. All the same root word. So there's kind of a symmetry in what's going on here. Jacob, the cheater, is at the river of a struggle wrestling. And you kind of see it's kind of like that turning point in his life. But it's kind of an interesting kind of set of circumstances that's happening here. And then what does God say about him? You've striven with God and with man and have prevailed. So here you really see Jacob, the course of his life has been, you go get what you want. So with people, he took his brother's, he cheated his brother out of his birthright. He stole his brother's blessing. He was cheated by Laban, but then he also worked it out where he ended up with the blessing anyway. And you just see Jacob, he wanted God's blessings, but the way he went about getting them was taking for himself. There's an interesting parallel verse to this, and this is in Hosea chapter 12, and it starts in verse 3. And here is Hosea just describing Jacob's relationship with God and how it turned out. Hosea chapter 12, starting in verse 3. In the womb he took his brother by the heel, and at his maturity he contended with God. Yes, he wrestled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought his favor. He found him at Bethel, and there he spoke to us. So here you see this idea of Jacob, when he was born, he was holding his brother's heel, trying to get the preeminence over his brethren. And he fought for that and took that. And then he wrestled with the angel and prevailed. So he was not going to give up. But the way the Hosea text reads, I read a couple of things that a couple of linguist commentaries on this, and they all agreed that it was he wrestled with, while the idea in the Hebrew is while he wrestled, he wept and sought favor. So it wasn't just wrestling, and then when the wrestling was over, he wept and sought favor. It was he tried subduing this angel and holding him to get the blessing, but he was asking for the blessing. But once the angel disabled Jacob, and Jacob still refused to let him go, but it was when he asked for a blessing. It wasn't when he was trying to take the blessing. It's when he asked for the blessing, God gave it to him. And this was a major turning point. And Jacob, just realize, Jacob, you don't have to take it for yourself. Just ask me. And so at this point, God, and the blessing he gave Jacob, what's your name? Cheater. Okay, well that reveals a lot about Jacob and his history, saying, my name is Cheater or Heel Grabber, the supplanter. He's like, okay, your name is no longer the supplanter. You're God's fighter. And not fight against God, but fight for God. You're God's fighter. I think it was Nimrod who said he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. But that meaning of mighty hunter before the Lord really means the mighty hunter against God. Like in defiance of God. That he was a mighty hunter. Or this is the exact opposite. He's a fighter for the Lord. And so the Lord blessed him by saying, I'm going to change who you are. I'm going to give you a different path in life. And instead of fighting against me your whole life, and I'm going to have you fighting for me. And really, that's a major shift in Jacob. But it's an interesting parallel, because in our lives, we have a time, when we're struggling. A lot of us have struggled against the Lord, have fought to take good things for ourselves, and have not yielded to God. But it's only after we yield our life to God, say, Lord, lead me. Lord, I trust you to bless me, that really we make a real change. And when we become Christians, when we gain that, in Revelation, he says, I'm going to give you a new name. And it's the same sort of thing. I'm going to change who you are. I'm going to give you a better name. And ultimately, when you call yourself a Christian, you have a new name. You're naming yourself after Christ. I think it's Philippians 2, maybe 21 or 22. I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And that's the idea, is I have a new name, it's Christ. I try to be like him now. I try to identify with him. I try to follow his example. And really, in this point in Jacob's life, you really have this pivot that he changes. He still has a lot of struggle in his life, but you never see him cheat again. You see him struggle but not cheat. And I think, and his sons walk in his path. But he is actually changed in that. So any thoughts or comments on that before we move forward? If not, let's go ahead and move into chapter 33. In chapter 33, we face Esau. So Jacob says this prayer prior to wrestling. One thing I want to mention is just note what he says after he gains the blessing. In verse 30, chapter 32, verse 30. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been preserved. So that's kind of an important thing. So he names it face to face because he saw God face to face and lived. God spared him. And he recognizes that. When he realized, it's getting light, you need to go. Well, he held on to him into the light, and he saw God's face, and God spared him. And so he recognizes, okay, that guy I was wrestling, it was the angel of the Lord. So now he moves on. In verse 33, Jacob lifted his eyes, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided his children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 maids, and he put the maids and their children in front, and Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph last. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed down to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. Then Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. He lifted his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, "Who are these with you?" So he said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the maids came near with their children, and they bowed down. Leah likewise came near with their children, and they bowed down. And afterward Joseph came near with Rachel, and they bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean by all this company which I have met?" And he said, "To find favor with the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother. Let what you have be your own." Jacob said, "No, please. Now if I have found favor in your sight, then take the present from my hand, for I see your face as one sees the face of God, and you have received me favorably." Isn't that an interesting statement right there? What does that remind you of? Same comment he made to the angel. See, he was commenting, "I was delivered from God and preserved, even though I acted inappropriately, and I saw him face to face." Now he's coming to his brother. What had happened before this, he sent droves of animals. He comes across one group of animals. "Oh, this is a gift from your brother Jacob. He's behind me." He hits another group of animals. So Jacob passes on a great amount of wealth to Esau on the way, but what he was doing is he was paying for his brother's favor. When Esau finally arrives, what's Jacob do? Bow down 7 times. Your servant, my Lord. I see the face of my Lord as one who sees the face of God. So you just see, he's like, "I was afraid of you. I expected you to strike me dead. And I know there was nothing I could do about it." Like that's what Jacob is saying to Esau, is I was afraid of you, rightly so. But his gift appeased the anger of his brother and his subservient attitude towards his brother. So his brother says, "Oh no, you keep it. I don't need it." But this was kind of the way we saw this kind of negotiation several times when Abraham was buying the field to bury Sarah in. "I want this field." "Oh, it's only what is 400 shekels between me and you? Like, just take it." And Abraham's like, "No, I want to pay for it." "Well, don't worry about it. I'll just give it to you. Take the field and everything in it." And Abraham's like, "No, I insist." So he weighs out 400 shekels. The guy's like, "Okay, I'll take it." But it's a way of saying, "I'm willing to give it to you, but I also will take the money." So that it just was a way of being respectful, where no one loses face or whatever. And you see the same sort of thing going on here. So Esau accepts the gift of his brother, accepts the subservience of his brother, says, "All right, let's go to Seir now." And Jacob's like, "The animals can't handle that kind of a hard march. We're just going to take the pace. We got babies, we got children, we got baby animals, we got children. I care about this, so we're just going to move on at a casual pace, whatever the animals and the people with the children allow." And he's like, "Well, let me leave some guys with you to help you out." That probably is a little bit of an ominous. "I got this group of soldiers with me. Let me leave a few with you." And Jacob's like, "What are they going to do? I already got everyone I need. I'll catch up with you in Mount Seir." So Esau's like, "All right, we'll see you down there." He takes off, and Jacob goes the other way. So he gets out of there. He doesn't go down to Mount Seir to visit his brother. Rightly so. Something interesting that I just noticed was not in the story here is with Laban, they made peace. They ate a meal. They had some sort of alliance moving forward where they knew we're not going to attack each other. We're not going to hurt one another. That didn't happen with Esau. Esau took the gift, let Jacob call him Lord, and left. But there's no peace made. And I think that's just kind of an interesting element to this, because multiple times you see throughout the book peace being made between 2 opponents. And in this case, you don't see peace being made at all. So Jacob, Esau, chapter 33, verse 16. Esau returned that day on his way to Mount Seir. Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock there. The place is named Succoth, which basically means booths. So he named the place booths because he made some booths there. We can kind of see the map. But so if we'll zoom in a little bit, and you can see right here, that is where Succoth, Sukkoth or whatever it's called, that's where he makes peace. So they're traveling south, right in this area. Mahanaim is where he saw the angels. Here's where he wrestled. Here's where he met Esau, and this is where he settled for a short time. Just kind of give us an idea of, he's moving slowly is kind of the idea. Verse 18. Now Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, and which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan Aram and camped before the city. He bought a piece of land where he had pitched his tent from the hand of his sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Then he erected there an altar and called it Elohe Israel, God, the God of Israel. So here you see him, he built an altar, and he starts calling, remember when he left the land? He said, if you bring me back safely, you'll be my God. And so he names his altar the God of Israel. So he's at least acknowledging that. However, we're going to have a little pause here in Shechem, get into a little bit of trouble, and Jacob does not return to Bethel right away. So Bethel's the place where he passes his pillar, where that vow is fulfilled. And part of that vow is I'm going to give 10% of all that I have to you. So that's the vow, but Jacob is dragging his feet to cross that point, it seems like, in settling in Shechem. Because Bethel, I think, is only 15 miles south. It's not very far. He's traveled so far at this point, he's not really that far coming here. But he stops here in Bethel, and now we get a little bit of trouble. In chapter 34, let me just look at my notes real quick. In chapter 34, verses 1 through 6, we have an incident in Shechem where there's the Hamor, who is, I think, the king or the ruler or governor or whatever he would be of Shechem. And his son is named Shechem. And so Dinah, Jacob's only daughter, so you think about this young lady, she is the sole sister of 11 brothers, 11 older brothers. I think maybe Joseph is younger than her, but she's got a lot of brothers. That's not somebody you want to mess with, right? And so that's kind of where they're at. And we already know these guys are a little wild because we know the story of Joseph. That's coming in a few chapters. So these guys are kind of tough guys, farm boys, if you will. Out in the mountains, killing lions and bears that are coming after their sheep. Like, they're kind of lived the life of David before he was a warrior, but what David did as a shepherd prepared him to be a warrior. So these men are not timid, wilting flowers or whatever you want to call them. They're hard-working farm boys that don't appreciate someone hurting their sister. And so that's really what you end up with is verse 30, chapter 1 through 6, then it talks about how Dinah is raped by the son of Hamor, Shechem. And on top of that, it's instead of really trying to, it doesn't seem like he's making it right. What he's trying to do is say, now let me have her for my wife. So it's really an abrasive situation that's happening here to the family of Jacob. But look in verse 5. It says, now Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter, but his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob kept silent until they came in. So Jacob doesn't take immediate action. Maybe partly because he's a cripple. He was a pretty formidable fighter, it seems like, but his hip was damaged and he limped for the rest of his life. And so he keeps silent, but when his sons come, he lets them know. In verse 7, it says, "Now the sons of Jacob came in from the field when they heard it, and the men were grieved, and they were very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such thing ought not be done." So now you see Jacob kept silent, but they feel this should never have happened. This is wrong. And it's true. It's true. This should never have happened. And the father should have dealt with it, but he didn't. For what? I don't know why. Maybe he needed his sons, but even with the sons, he didn't deal with it. Levi and Simeon never felt like that justice was done in any way. So what ends up happening here in verses 7 through 13, they come to Jacob at this point and they say, "Hey, let's make an alliance. Let's marry and let's blend our families. Let's share our wealth. Let's grow together. Let's become a people." So they're making this offering to Jacob because they see an advantage in it for themselves. And really, if you stop and think about what happened here, not too different than what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. Right? They wanted something and so they took it. And here again, we want what Jacob has, so we're going to try and find a way to take it. And it shouldn't happen that way. It was wrong what's happening, but you see that the impact of these ungodly people being in their presence, it was a problem. So he's trying to make arrangements to marry Dinah, and verse 13, it's interesting to me, Jacob's sons answer instead of Jacob. But in verse 13, Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit because he had defiled Dinah's sister. So they had a plan, and they're like, all right, we're going to deal with this ourselves since Dad's not going to deal with it. And so they said, here's the deal, verse 15, "Only on this condition will we consent to you if you'll become like us in that every male of you becomes circumcised." Look, we're all circumcised. We're not going to have anything to do with uncircumcised people. So unless you're willing to do that, then we're not going to have anything to do with you. And since they were so motivated, they went home, made the case. Verse 19, the young man did not delay to do the thing because he was delighted with Jacob's daughter. Now he was more respected than all the household of his father. Isn't that another interesting point? It's like, who's the most respected guy? Yeah, exactly. And so you just see that this is not really a good group of people anyway. If we fast forward, this man goes and makes a sales pitch. And part of his sales pitch, verse 23, which helps reveal their thoughts again, "Will not their livestock and their property and all their animals be ours?" That was the sales pitch. If we do this one painful thing, then we're going to end up taking everything he has, and he's a rich man. So that seems like a good deal. So it's all going to be ours. So just go ahead and go along with this one thing. So they all went ahead and got circumcised. Verse 25. "Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took up his sword and came upon the city unaware and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword. They took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth." So what deal did Jacob make? Dinah was at his house, at their house. So obviously he had given a consent to marry her. These boys weren't going to have it. So they go down and they commit this slaughter. They kill the whole town for the sin of one person, which is wrong too. So they go out, but what they do is they deal with sin on their own terms. Verse 26, "They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword. They took Dinah from Shechem's house and went forth. Jacob's sons came upon the slain, and looted the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks, their herds, their donkeys, and that which was in the city and that which was in the field. They captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses." So here they took them all. What do you do with all the children and all the women? You got them all. What are you going to do with them? Likely sell them into captivity. Right? And they go to Shechem. That's where they sell Jacob into captivity. Or Joseph into captivity. So maybe the same sort of thing. But what they did is they just totally pillaged everything they had for retribution against this. So verse 30 it says, Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, You have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites, the Perizzites, and my men being few in number, they will gather against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household. But they said, Should he treat our sister as a harlot? So they said, we needed justice, which is probably a true thing, but is that the kind of justice they needed? I want to just stop right here for a moment and this statement, should he treat our sister as a harlot? That is a demand for justice. Now, and it's easy to be angry at them and almost easy to sympathize with Levi and Simeon, to feel that way. But we need to flip the script a little bit. I think there's something in here that is vital for us to understand. In what condition did we come to God seeking a relationship from Him? Worse off. So first we violate something, and then we come to Him seeking a relationship, and what do we say? It's going to be a real blessing for me. What do I have to offer? I want to take, but I don't offer to give. But there's this problem of injustice. That shouldn't have been that way. So how men deal with it, like Levi and Simeon, they go out for vengeance. They go out for justice. They go out without mercy and take life. How did God deal with us? I want to just read a few verses. And in the light of this particular chapter, which is a little bit of a disturbing chapter, but it helps us to maybe see a little of God's goodness amplified, because we came to God with the same set of problems. We acted wickedly. We defiled things that should have been pure. And then we wanted to take it for ourselves and make a relationship after the damage was done. In Romans chapter 8, or 5 verse 8, it says, But God demonstrates His own love towards us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Much more than, having now been justified by His blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through Him. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of His Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by His life. When God decided to let His Son shed His blood for your sins, we were Shechem. That's who I was, coming to God, trying to make an alliance. And instead of the retribution we deserved, He said, I'm going to let my only begotten Son die to pay the debt that you can't pay, so I can have a relationship with you. That's a pretty powerful thing, a pretty great love. I love that. Really hard to wrap your mind around. You know, it's just one of those things. It's hard to wrap your mind around. And also, I have several verses here that talk about this, but maybe one more is in 1 Peter chapter 2. And starting in verse 22, or verse 21. For you have been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in His steps. So we'll just stop right there. It says, what Jesus did, what we see God doing through Christ, follow that example. So we're coming to God and saying, can I have a relationship with you? And he's like, yeah, I'll pay all the price, but here's what I want is look at the price that I'm going to pay for you and follow that example. Walk in those steps. Verse 22, who committed no sin, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. And while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but he kept entrusting himself to the one who judges righteously. And he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. For by his wounds you were healed. For you were continually straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your soul. That last little bit of the verse, I just saw it yesterday in Isaiah 53. It says, for we are all straying like sheep, and he caused the punishment of us all to fall upon him, is what Psalm 53 says. But same sentiment here. So the thing we can learn from this is, don't be like Levi and Simeon. Levi and Simeon were cursed because of this. But if we follow in Jesus' footsteps, we'll be blessed. And so you really see, I think there's a lesson we can learn from this perfect chapter of the Bible. And really, this is one of those chapters, it's in there for a reason. And in fact, let's just go ahead and examine that real quick. Why is this in there? See if I can find my notes. Okay, let's go ahead and take a quick look at Genesis chapter 49. And we'll start in verse 3. Here's the end of Jacob's life. We're going to start with Reuben, and we'll see at the end of chapter 35 a little statement about, one of these chapters, there's a little statement about Reuben taking his father's concubine and being cursed for that. So why are we bringing all that up? Why does that matter? Why is that important? It's important because of the birthright. Jacob had the birthright. He had to pass it off to one of his sons. Well, why didn't Reuben get it? Well, let's go ahead and read. Genesis 49, starting in verse 3. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed, then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So he says, you don't get the birthright. You don't get preeminence because of what you did. So you're out. Verse 4 or verse 5. Simeon and Levi, so the next two sons in birth order. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. Let not my glory be united with their assembly. Because in their anger they slew men. In their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So here you have this next curse on Simeon and Levi because of the violence of who they were. They were violent men, and they did spiteful things. And he's like, they're not going to be, I will not take their counsel or be united with them. I'm going to scatter them. But now look in verse 8. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's son shall bow down to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He crouches, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion who dares to rouse him. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He ties a foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of the grape. So here you see, he's saying, Judah, you're my glory. You're the son of the birthright. You're the one who's going to bring forth the king. The scepter shall not depart from your house. So you see, it's interesting. Well, why was Jesus? And so the story is in the Bible to let us know why Judah, the fourth son, was the line of the king. Why not Reuben? Why was Jesus from the line of Judah? Well, now we know. We have that story of Levi and Simeon being violent and murdering a city because of the action of one man. And that the reason why that's in there is to explain why the birthright passed from them down to Judah as it did. And then if we look at the end of 35, you'll see Reuben. Yeah?
Was it Judah that kept in and kept him from killing Joseph?
No, Judah's the one who sold Joseph. He wasn't like completely innocent, but
Yeah, I was trying to remember if there was a connection.
it was Reuben
It was Reuben
that stepped in.
that.
So yeah, Reuben stepped in, but it was after he had.
And was it also, second part of that question, was it also Reuben that vouched?
I think it was.
Or was it Judah that vouched to get Benjamin back?
I don't recall now. I read it today, but I don't recall if it was Judah or
It was
Reuben.
about 16 times the last 2 weeks, and I can't remember.
Yes. It's in chapter 42, if you want to look it up, though. So verse 35. So Jacob has this event happen in Shechem. He's afraid of the people. In the same time period, verse 35, verse 1, then God said to Jacob, arise, go to Bethel, and live there. Make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. I just appreciate this because there's a couple reasons. One, God calls the place the same name Jacob called it. Go to Bethel. The house of God is what Bethel means. He's like, go there, make your house there. That's an interesting parallel, isn't it? Make the house of God the house of Israel. That's kind of an interesting parallel. Make an altar there. Now, I think this might be one of the first places you see God commanding an altar to be built. But he's like, make an altar there. What does that imply? Remember the promise that Jacob made when he was going through Bethel the first time? If you bring me back to this place, and I'm okay, and I've had food and clothing and a house, and if you take care of me, then you'll be my God, and I'll give 10% of all that I have to you. So now here God is asking, go do that, set up a formal worship, and keep your vow. So you see God calling on Jacob to perform according to his word. And he's like, and then live there. Verse 2, so Jacob said to his household and all who were with him, put away the foreign gods which are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments. Let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answers me in the day of my distress, and has been with me wherever I have gone. So here Jacob goes to his family and says, all right, time to put away all your idols. Now, obviously, they were smuggling idols out of Laban's house, and they had some problems. But when God called Jacob, Jacob says, I know what this means. We're going to have one God in this home, and it's going to be that God. And so get rid of all that stuff. So they go ahead and take it all. They bury it under an oak tree in Shechem, likely the same oak tree that Abraham planted when he lived in Shechem. So they bury it under the oak tree and get rid of all that stuff. They purify themselves. They wash themselves. They wash their clothes. They get themselves ready. It's only 15 miles to Bethel, so it's not a huge trip. But they go ahead and pull up stakes, move down to Bethel, and begin to worship God there as their only God. So they shift their loyalty. Jacob's God becomes Jehovah. Verse 4, so they gave Jacob all the foreign gods that they had and the rings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was in Shechem, and they journeyed there with a great terror upon the cities which were around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. So Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is the land of Canaan, he and all his people who were with him. He built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, which is God, the house of God, because there God had revealed himself to him when he fled from his brother. So here you see Jacob go and he begins worshiping God in Bethel and calls the place God, the God of Bethel. Verse 8, we begin our transition into a new part of this story. Verse 8 is the death of Deborah. It's kind of an interesting little add-on because Deborah, I don't believe, became a concubine of Isaac. Rebekah had children for him, but she was in Jacob's house for some reason. So that either indicates that Rebekah died, and so Deborah moved up to live in Jacob's house. But notice what the honor they pay to this servant. Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the oak, which was called the Oak of Weeping. So they buried her in an honored place, and they were heartbroken over her loss. And you just see that she was someone that, although she was a servant in the house, she was loved and dear to them. I think that's just it's kind of just an interesting little piece of this where you start seeing some transition things. We're going to see people dying off in this particular chapter, but would have been someone Jacob knew his whole life, and think of maybe he might call her Aunt Debbie or something like that, and he lost her, so that was sad for them. Verse 9. Then God appeared to Jacob again when he had came from Paddan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel." This is chapter 35, starting in verse 10. God said to him, "Your name is Jacob. You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel shall be your name." Thus he called him Israel. God also said to him, "I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come forth from you. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, I will give it to you, and I will give the land to your descendants after you." Then God went up from him into the place where he had spoken to him. Went up from him in the place where he had spoken to him. So here's the promise of Abraham passed on to him, with one interesting addition is the end of verse 11, "Kings shall come forth from you." That wasn't in the previous promises. So here's another piece of the promise, is there's going to be a king included. Like, that's one of the significant things. And it also kind of helps to explain why this other story gets added in, because it's an aspect of determining who is the king. Jacob sets up a pillar and goes ahead and worships God there. And as he travels from Bethel, so he stays there for a while, likely a long while. In the next couple chapters, we're going to see Isaac dies at 180 years old shortly after Rachel dies. And Jacob was born when Isaac was 60. So Jacob's now 120 years old when Isaac dies. So it just kind of gives us a sense of timing on all this. So he leaves Bethel. As he's traveling, Rachel began to give birth, and she suffered severe labor. When she was in severe labor, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for now you have another son." It came about, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Ben-Oni means the son of my sorrows. And Jacob was like, we're not calling him that. We're going to call him the son of my right hand. And most people believe that he's called the son of his right hand because he was a left-handed guy. And so later on, you're going to see the left-handed slingers of Benjamin, who could hit a hare with a sling. And likely that's why they called him that, is because like Mason's the son of my right hand, he's left-handed. So when we stand side by side, our strong arms are together. So that's kind of the idea with that. But it was an honorable name for Benjamin. And Rachel died. So here's another think about Jacob, many losses. He's kind of at this point of life where he's suffering a lot of losses of people, his family. Verse 19, so Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a pillar over her grave. That is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. Then Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And it came about while Israel was dwelling in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard of it. So there's kind of another kind of awkward verse thrown in there. But the reason for this is actually kind of a cultural thing, but that was a way that you would try to assert your dominance over your father's household. So if you recall Absalom, he did the same thing with David's concubines. But it was a way to say, I'm the patriarch now, you can't stop me. And but Jacob ended up cursing him for it. But that's in there to explain why was Judah the line of the king. And this tells us why. I want to skip the sons. It just tells us the sons of Jacob. Verse 28 though, now the days of Isaac were 180 years. Isaac breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, an old man of ripe age, and his son Esau and Jacob buried him. So you see, just as Ishmael and Isaac buried Abraham, you see Jacob and Esau, although they maybe weren't friends, they came together to bury their father. And so now you see the final chapter in this part of Genesis. Verse 36, these are the records of the generation of Esau. So we get the generations of Esau. This is interesting to me, not because I want to read it, but because of the extensive detail that's included. Read chapter 36, and it's like, here's Esau, here's his sons, here's his grandsons, here's these people, the Edomites that he came across, here's their sons, here's their grandsons, here's who married who, here are all the chiefs of Esau, here are all the chiefs of Edom. I read someone who made an interesting comment on that. Jacob is living in Canaan in a tent, waiting for the promise of God. And no kings come from his family at this point. And Esau is out living for the flesh. He is very materially minded, and he's prospering and growing and becoming, like it says, here are all the kings before Israel had a king in Edom. So it's just saying Edom's kingdom was established a lot faster, but it wasn't according to God's promise. So this is Esau's reward for abandoning his birthright and abandoning the blessing of God in his search for carnal things. He abandoned the promise, but he lived for this life only, gained in this life only, and that was a problem for him. And his nation now, you would never know it existed except for if you go to the south end of the Dead Sea, there's interesting buildings carved into stone. And that is what has remained. I think the city's called Petra, but that's what remains of Edom. No people, no culture, just buildings carved into sandstone. And so that's all he has to claim, where we have a promise. We are, all of us, sons of Abraham through faith. And Abraham's continuing to have children and add children to the kingdom of God and to the family of God through Jesus, because he was patient and waited for the promise. I just think that's kind of another interesting parallel of why is it important to trust in God, to wait on the Lord. And what is it, Isaiah 40? Those who wait on the Lord will rise up with wings like an eagle. They'll run and not get wings like an eagle. They'll run and not get tired, and they will be blessed by God. I can't remember it exactly off the top of my head, but it's a great little scripture and encouraging one. Next week, we'll be in chapter 37. We'll begin with the story of Joseph. Very interesting and a great narrative. Really an applicable narrative about trusting in God, and really something I think that relates very directly to the way we live. You know, all these things happen, and you don't know why they're happening. But as soon as you look back on your life, you say, oh, I see how all that worked together to get me to where God wanted me to be. And that's really the story of Joseph. And there's a lot of parallels between Joseph and Christ as well, which is kind of an interesting thing. Is if you're pre-reading for next week, I don't know how many chapters we'll get through. Plan on maybe 4, and we'll probably do 3. But plan on 4 for your reading, and then we can go ahead and talk through those things. Any thoughts or comments before we wrap it up for tonight? If not, let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Our most gracious God,